Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Ana Gumbau. I'm a climate journalist saying hi from Brussels, and I will be your host in today's event. This is a webinar organized by IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, and the NL Foundation. This is in the framework of the All for Climate initiative. This is an initiative launched by the Italian Ministry for the Ecological Transition to foster proactive climate dialogue, especially now in the run-up to COP26 and further in the international climate negotiations process. So today we will be talking about the importance of international cooperation to address climate change, and especially on empowering the role of youth in these processes. And I can assure you, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who will inspire us and empower us to take action in climate change. So first things first, though, a couple of housekeeping remarks. First of all, we have several young attendants joining us, which is great. To all of you, it would be great if maybe you get the chance to maybe turn on your cameras so we can see who we are speaking to and who's participating, as if we would be in a, in an actual theater, in an actual conference room. Second of all, as you may have seen in the chat, there's interpretation available in Arabic, French, and Spanish. And last but not least, so you have a Q&A function. So please write down the questions that you intend to address to our speakers. And once we get to the Q&A section of the event, I will call you to take the floor and ask the question to our speakers. So now, let's get started. We would like to start with a short poll on Slido to get some first interaction and to get to know you. So if we could have the, yeah, thanks. So it's on the screen. You have the number through which you can connect through Slido. So join at slido.com and introduce the code with the hashtag. And it will be great to hear your first thoughts on this question. So what does driving climate ambition mean to you? What do you think is the key priority here? Maybe it's to increase the collaboration of all actors, to support awareness raising efforts in civil society, to increase representation, to increase nationally determined contributions, maybe it's investments. What do you think about it? So please, I would like to encourage you to share your views with us, and we're getting some very first responses, so don't be shy, keep them coming. We see neck to neck. All right. I think there's a half saying that increasing collaboration of all actors is important, but also awareness raising efforts towards civil society. A lot of you think that massive investments need to be enabled. So if I could perhaps give a couple more seconds, massive investments are catching up now. But I think so far we have our three winners fighting for the podium. So first, with massive investments and enabling these disruptive technologies for mitigation and adaptation, to increasing collaboration of all actors and support awareness raising towards civil society. So perhaps we can already move to our second question of the day, which is a word cloud. So we would like you to provide up to 3 words in which aspect of international energy and climate cooperation you, the young people, should be more involved in. Just perhaps like a few words to get an idea of what do you think matters the most right now. We've got climate education and culture, very interesting. Behavioral change, really interesting. Environmental peace building, sustainable technologies, climate justice and capital letters are important. Some innovative thinking. We're getting national climate plans here, which are key to drive ambition across countries. Well, climate education is to a big lead. Keep them coming, a few more seconds. We're seeing also the just transition mentioned. Great. We're seeing perhaps, I think we have a winner with climate education, but we're getting many important remarks. Green recovery, raising awareness, innovation, climate justice. And we're getting like plenty of new interesting words. We have startups, we have inclusion, we have sustainable living, we have renewable energies. So I think there's a lot of topics that we are going to be touching upon in the next hour and a half, up to 2 hours. So thank you very much again for joining us and participating in this first ice-breaking activity with us. So thanks again for participating. And now it's time to hear our first speeches of the day, of the night, wherever you are connecting from. So I would like now to give the floor for the first introductory remarks. And I would like to start by welcoming Mr. Francesco La Camera, Director General at IRENA. Mr. La Camera, please, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Umbau. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us today from all around the world. I am pleased to welcome you all to this edition of the IRENA Youth Talk, organized in collaboration with the Enel Foundation as a part of the All for Climate initiative launched by the Italian Ministry for Ecological Transition to foster proactive climate dialogue in run-up to the COP26. As we come today to take a step further towards a more inclusive and just future through international cooperation in climate action, please allow me to thank all our estimated guests for their participation to this event. Allow me also to thank our moderator, Anna, for being with us today. Finally, I warmly welcome our young panelists, each of whom represents an important partner in achieving a sustainable, climate-resilient future. Thank you all for being with us, and I'm sure your contribution today will be impactful for future action. Many of you participated in the previous IRENA Youth Talk, in which we had diverse and passionate perspectives on the role that the young people can and should play in promoting an inclusive and just energy transition. Today, we aim to move forward, explore with you leaders how international cooperation can achieve climate and sustainable development objectives, providing a valuable opportunity to actively contribute to the debate on climate change in the lead up to COP26. The climate crisis is a global issue that requires global actions. Each year, the global community meets at high-level events to find solutions and define future actions for people and the planet towards shared prosperity. By working together, nations can accelerate progress to limit the rising temperature to 1.5 Celsius and achieve net zero emission globally by mid-century. But to work effectively, it is crucial to include one of the most important actors on the climate issue, the youth. Youth today are fearlessly standing up for what is right. More and more young people have been vocal in bringing urgency to the international public debate on climate change in recent years. I have said it before, and I will say it again. You are heroes and pioneers in our home right. Thanks for your effort. Climate change is getting the attention that it deserves. You identify, approach it, act it at the necessary speed our climate is urgently seeking. Your generation is now taking the lead to act fast in shaping a renewable power, sustainable energy future for all. Together with you, we can tackle climate change and shape the future into a more sustainable and climate resilient world. It is now the time to act collectively. As we proceed with our discussion today, I encourage you to continue embodying a spirit of urgency and perseverance in the pursuit of a new energy system that promises a climate-safe future defined by stable and inclusive development. And as you strive for this, you can be assured that IRENA stands with you every step on the way. Thank you very much, and back to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Mr. La Camera, for this first refreshing and empowering words. So I would like also now to give the floor. It's our pleasure to have Mr. Francesco Starace, the CEO and General Manager at Enel and the Chairman of the Enel Foundation. Mr. Starace, please.
Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm really glad that IRENA and Enel are collaborating through our Enel Foundation in organizing this edition of the IRENA Group Youth Talk. I think this is a great initiative, and I am one of those that really put to value the partnership that Enel Foundation has with IRENA and the value that we can all unlock if we work together. Why we think this is important is something that Francesco La Camera has already mentioned before. We have an incredible opportunity in enlarging and in putting young people at the center of this energy transition. The climate crisis hits all of us. Nobody is exempted from it. But clearly, I would say if I were a younger person, I would feel more hit by what is going on than as I am today. This is because the future is not looking fantastic if you see it from the point of view of what's happening to climate change. And this is one point. And the other point is also that in order to tackle this crisis and solve the emergency, on the longer term, we need young people. They will have the ideas that we haven't yet had. They will have the solutions that we haven't found yet. They will have the enthusiasm that in many of us maybe is lacking because they are younger, but also because they have more future in front of themselves. So this is a huge change that we all have to understand will take hundreds and hundreds of years. If we tackle the first crisis, which is stop the increase of the amount of greenhouse gases that we have accumulated in the past 2 centuries in the atmosphere, we will have to work for a longer time period to bring this number, these tons of CO2 back to the previous level, where we can ascertain that climate will self-stabilize back to its normal level. So it's a very, very long time exercise, broken in different parts, but young people need to be there, and the younger and younger generations need to continue work at this effort. So this is the reason why we think it's important. This is the reason why we think we should give a signal to everyone that it is not something that can be fixed in a moment. It requires dedicated efforts through generations in order for this problem to be solved. And it is important in this generation, and that's why we feel so compelled by this kind of fora. It is important for these generations to tell the truth about it and to act immediately on top of this. And one other thing that I think is an attribute of young people is that they like the truth to be said. And so we have an obligation in that sense. And I think putting them into the picture raises the percentage of truth in the discourse, if I can say in the right words. I think we all need to change our behavior sooner or later, and I think better sooner than later. And this is also something that the young generation have more capability of doing. They have less habits to dispose of. They are more able to understand what needs to be done and do it rather than keep the inertia of previous behaviors. And I think, and I can testify, it is a generation of young people that needs motivation much more than previous generations to do a proper job. And this is a mission that we all have to really understand. It is a deep motivation in me, at least. I'm not that young, I would say, but I think for people to work and know that their job is contributing to solve this threat to our being on the planet is very important. And I think we have to project and explain to young people what it takes to change the climate. And I'm sure that this will not discourage, but will improve, will increase the motivation to act and to work in this direction. We have a lot of examples of that because we interact with young people not only on the daily job. We have a lot of young people in Enel, but also outside of Enel, with schools, with universities, with a lot of different organizations. And every time what we touch this point, we see much more interest than the average audience typically raises. We have a cooperation with universities, we have a cooperation with startups, we have a cooperation with research centers that add value to the discourse and also bring solutions to the table in order to accelerate this trend. But that, I would say, relies a lot more on younger generations than we thought would be at the beginning of this journey. So I think, in synthesis, this is a fantastic opportunity. I think this opportunity is to engage more with younger generation and to listen to also what concerns and what suggestions and what ideas younger generation bring to the table. There is no one that can say there is a complete holistic solution to the problem. It is a contribution that requires a massive team play. And I think in this, youth will be front and center in order to cope with the crisis. So thank you for being here. Again, thank you, IRENA, for organizing it. I think it's a great initiative, and I look forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Starace. I was involved for many years in the field of youth organizations. We always said that youth is not only the future, but it is already the present. And we're seeing this with many mobilizations of young people across the world demanding more climate action. And this is something that I find really impressive, which is that I've been reading your messages in the chat and I'm seeing people from all over the world, from Italy, Sudan, France, Uganda, Ukraine, India, Togo, Spain, Nigeria, Chile, Albania, Argentina. This is really impressive to have so many of you. So first of all, thank you very much to both Mr. Francesco La Camera and Mr. Francesco Starace for joining us today. I know both of you cannot stay for much longer, but we're grateful that you took the time to speak to us and to join us. And now I would suggest to go for our debate. Remember, we're going to talk today about international cooperation with the role of youth. And first of all, we have two brilliant experts who will give us a little introduction and perhaps, I think, also a lot of inspiration to kick off our discussion. So I would first like to introduce Madame Laurence Toubiana. She's the CEO of the European Climate Foundation. Madame Toubiana was also France's climate change ambassador and special representative for COP21. And as such, she was a key architect in the landmark of the Paris Agreement. So Madame Toubiana, welcome and thanks a lot for joining us today. I think you're muted, Madame Toubiana.
Yes, absolutely.
There you are.
Sorry. Yeah. So thank you, Anna. Thank you, Francisco, and Francesco Starace as well to team up to organize such an event. It's of course very important that an institution that is really making the case for renewable energy, that's the future. So that coincides very well with the element of generation and young people. And that's, so I see that's very, very natural. And when we look at the numbers, you see that, for example, in Africa, wind and solar energy represent just 3% of the energy supply. And you know, many of us know how much there is now a very hot debate on what should be the future of African energy supply. And that's, at the same time, the continent the majority of the people on the continent, 60%, are under 25 years. So should not they decide what they want for their energy future? I think it's really the views of the youth in Africa should be really in front of this investment. And we saw in the Slido how much investment in the future, and in particular in energy, is important in this panel of the all who are participating there. So, and I do think that's very important to have a contribution and mobilization of a company like Enel. Enel, we know, has been really on the front runner on clean energy, particularly you, Francesco, and so important that particular moment in time when we are to give the final push to that, we have to decarbonize totally the electricity in system all over the world. And that's good that companies are really embracing that future and banishing greenwashing. That's why I like enormously your reference to truth. And that the young people would not be fooled by greenwashing or something else, and they want the truth. And because they are participating, they could be, again, giving the criteria of we are really going in the right direction. And so keep intellectually honest and morally clear is really the value of debating with young people. So I really find the previous remark absolutely relevant. So on my side, I've been fighting for the climate for many years, maybe too long. I know it's long, and it's a several generation effort still, of course, from Rio to Copenhagen to Paris and now, of course, soon to Glasgow. I have experienced probably every possible emotion. Discouragement sometimes, sleepless nights, but also elation when there's been victories, and victories we have had, and we are making progress. And these victories are never a given. That's why I think we need a particular fuel for all this. And the fuel is the energy, and the energy, of course, and use is just more or less the same. No, I know that mobilization, the idea of really motivating this young generation and entitle them, given the entitlement just to operate and to design the future is a condition for their energy to flow and to transform their legitimate anger into a very positive energy. But this is possible because of this, really, we need high level of energy to influence and to modify the decision making. Generation of young people have driven already the agenda to where it is today. In Paris, we really try and finally could include the civil society at every moment and the youth groups at every moment of the discussion. We had regular meeting every 15 days with a different organization, and it was good to have their feedback and to measure what we were able to define as the ambition of Paris Agreement, in particular the long-term goal, that net zero emission by 2050, which was finally what was in the Paris Agreement with many other elements, of course. That was because looking at the future on the long-term strategies were key, and the youth group were very active to support that vision and to say we need absolutely short-term actions, as this is an emergency, but we need to have a direction of travel, a pathway that is really sustainable. At the same time, the young generation, the youth, they are not always in the room, and that must change. Again, so many young people are now composing the majority almost the majority of the world population. And the Paris Agreement in particular, which was such a landmark discussion, is focused in reality on the mid-century goal. So we still see that this is not reflected really in the negotiating table. This, as a table of discussion, the convening is now broader than it was, many more actors, companies, investors, local authorities. But it's just not now that we are looking for a real way, not a formal way, to have youth involved in the design of the future. That's why I was interested in seeing the different, keywords that the participant in a way picked up, and that the investment cooperation between actors went so high together with environment and climate justice and climate education. And it is important because I do think that we still see the youth as only the protest in the street and not as well the contribution to the design of the new thinking. And when thinking of what could be, of course, a real good involvement of all these people coming from very different backgrounds, when I read the chat, that we need fresh thinking and we need circles and networks that allow the youth voices, the voice intellectual capacities, the policy proposals, the political view to be reflected in the general public debate, and maybe something to organize. And I know that some of you, and that would be in the panel immediately after, are thinking and proposing a very, very interesting proposal on climate finance. For example, on the debt restructuring, there are young people are working on the trade rules. And there is now young economists, lawyers at the beginning of their careers that are really keeping fighting to reframe the economic and the political debate. And that is really important, maybe to leave them a space, maybe review or journals where we have this dimension of the young generation looking at the future and in a way reshaping the discipline, the classical discipline that are now most of the time controlled and in a way shaped by much older generation. So in the inevitable need for reform, to give the floor, will create amazing possibility, and we know that it will be more jobs, more opportunities, more justice. So it's an incredibly energizing prospect, both at global level, but at local level. And in a way, I see that I understand totally the disenchantment, the disillusion about all these climate plans in countries, because you felt evidently in the poll that finally it was not so important because governments are not delivering on their promises. So it's good at the same time to be involved in the national discussion to craft what could be this contract for development that could be really sustainable. So I do think that the youth have to be involved in the national discussion as well. And just not wanting to be long, I'd like, it's good to set targets. It's good to really be involved in real action and proposal. And it's interesting to see at the same time how the youth, Francisco Starace was talking about the truth, and it's expressed itself through a demand of the young generation, forcing in a way government to respond, to be accountable of what they do, or even companies. The Youth for Climate Justice case, for example, there is really an excellent example of legal advocacy, forcing the state to catch up with reality and act accordingly. So I thank you for the patience of all these young people, and mostly for your impatience. You are doing the right thing. I know that with you, there will be many more victories, but speak up, make the proposal, be invested, and will create your own network of thinking, advocacy, and influence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Turiana, for setting the scene so nicely ahead of our debate. We also have with us Professor Robert Stavins, an A.J. Meyer Professor of Energy and Economic Development at Harvard University. He's also the director of the Harvard Environmental Economics Program and the director of the Harvard Project on Climate Agreements, among many other different capacities in his scholarly career. So, Professor Stavins, thank you very much for joining us today, this morning for you.
Well, thank you, Anna. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I feel privileged to be part of such a distinguished panel. In my very brief comments, I'm going to begin with some science, which will take us to some economics, which will then take us to policy and politics, which is where things happen. So the science is that, as I hope all of you know, greenhouse gases mix in the atmosphere. And so the location of emissions has no effect on impacts, not on the overall magnitude of impacts, nor the location of impacts. in economic terms, climate change is a global commons problem. That means then that any jurisdiction that takes action incurs the costs of its actions, the cost essentially of shifting from coal to petroleum to natural gas to renewables and possibly nuclear power for the generation of electricity, the costs of greater energy efficiency and the like. But the climate benefits from its actions are distributed globally. Therefore, for virtually any jurisdiction, whether it's the entire European Union or it's a small member state or a city in the United States, for any jurisdiction, the climate benefits it reaps from its actions will be less than the costs that it incurs, despite the fact that the global benefits may be greater, possibly much greater than the global costs. This presents a classic free rider problem. It's in the interest of each jurisdiction to not take action, but to benefit from the actions of others. And it's for this reason that international, if not global, cooperation is essential. And in essence, that's why the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement are so important. Now, we're very involved in this at the Harvard Project on Climate Agreements, which I'll take note with pride is partly supported by the NL Foundation. The purpose of the Harvard Project is to help the countries of the world, as we've been doing for 20 years, to help them identify the key design elements of international agreements and policies that are scientifically sound, by which I mean the policies actually reduce emissions as opposed to simply demonizing the perceived bad guys. Economically sensible, that is, in the process of addressing climate change, we sacrifice as little as possible in regard to the other things we care about: reasonably priced energy, available food supply, human health, education, on and on. And finally, in addition to being scientifically sound and economically sensible, politically pragmatic. Now, there are ongoing challenges, including providing for linkage across international borders for cooperation under the Paris Agreement. Under the one part of the Paris Agreement for which the rule book has not been completed, and that's Article 6. And there's the promise there that in Glasgow this year, the work on Article 6 will be completed in a wise way so that international cooperation, sharing of emissions control responsibilities will be shared, because that will bring down costs, which will then have the effect of facilitating greater ambition. So finally, how can you, young people, help? Well, I think the first thing to do is to be realistic. To ask yourself, do you want to be involved in carrying out fun, symbolic actions, or do you want to help facilitate meaningful change? Those are not necessarily, and frequently, in my experience, they're not the same thing. If it's the latter, if it's facilitating meaningful change, then I think we all benefit by acknowledging what we can accomplish and what we can't accomplish, what we know and what we don't know, and then take actions to learn, whether that means in school or in terms of practice. That doesn't matter, but learning. And here I am reminded of what I believe was the primary phrase that emerged in the thematic survey at the beginning: climate education. I've been working on climate change economics and policy at Harvard for close to 30 years now. but most important is that I continue to reflect on a daily basis on what I don't know. And I continue to learn, as I already have in the past 40 minutes, and I will continue to learn in the remainder of this program. And I hope everyone else does likewise. Thank you.
Professor Stevens, thank you so much. I think we've all noted down many of the keywords that will be appearing throughout this event. I'm thinking, for instance, the cost of taking actions versus the cost of inaction, or what are the tools needed, or like what can we do to facilitate this meaningful change that you were talking about. So without further ado, I think it's time now to meet our young panelists and start this debate. You might have some questions already, so remember that you have a Q&A function. You can write down the questions you intend to address to our speakers. And once we get to the Q&A session, I will call you to take the floor. Now for the debate, I will pass the baton to Dr. Federico Brocchieri. He's a climate consultant and researcher who will introduce our young speakers and guide our conversation with them in this first debate. So Federico, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to any of you, depending on where you are in the world. I'm very happy to be here today, and I want to thank IRENA and ENA Foundation for organizing this important event. Indeed, I'm a climate consultant and a researcher. My primary focus over the past 10 years has been on the UN climate negotiations that were just mentioned, and indeed, 2021 is a very important year for this process. We are approaching COP26 in Glasgow, which is called to deliver on very substantial elements of the Paris Rulebook, as well as to revamp ambition efforts by all countries. Moreover, just very recently, the new IPCC assessment report by Working Group 1 was released, sending a very clear message that we need to urgently tackle climate change, especially between now and 2030. So we have no time to lose. And in this sense, of course, the role of youth is essential to build the necessary political momentum on the one hand, and on the other, to advance concrete ideas and solutions at various levels. So for this reason, I'm very happy today to be able to moderate this interactive debate session and to have such a great panel joining me. So let me start by introducing you to Maria Constantinescu. Maria is a young professional working as a full-time sustainability officer at Bridgestone EMEA, enhancing the company's sustainability agenda and action plan. Moreover, she is the partnership officer of Young European Leadership, a youth-led NGO working for youth empowerment, and one of the Romanian delegates at the upcoming Youth for Climate event to be held in Milan in conjunction with the pre-COP26. So welcome, Maria. And I would like to kick off our discussion with the following question. Over the last year, you've been engaging, as I mentioned, with Young European Leadership, including by contributing to many youth activities. And my question would be, in your view, which role can organizations such as YEL play in closing the gap between youth and institutions, both public and private, on all matters that relate to climate change, transition and sustainability? And also perhaps what do you expect from the Youth for Climate event in Milan that will bring together nearly 400 people from all around the world? So please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Federico. Buonasera. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. I'm going to try to be as brief as possible because I see that we have amazing panelists tonight. And to answer your first question, Federico, I always consider organizations like Young European Leaderships catalysts for the young people. I consider them, if you may like to think like an elevator that lifts them up to the stage that they need to be. And as a young person coming from Romania, I didn't have enough resources to actually speak up and be involved in the decision-making process or the policy-making process. So based on the experience that I had throughout these organizations, I managed to be heard by other people or by the people who were relevant in the field of decision-making process. This is why I think it's so important to have organizations that are mainly youth-led and catalyze these efforts of the young people towards being heard. And yeah, that's mainly in a nutshell what I wanted to say. And because the most important topic that I would like to address is definitely the climate event that will take place in Italy in a bit. In 2 weeks, we will be coming into Milano, 400 delegates. But mainly what I can say as a delegate on behalf of Romania is that we want to be heard. And I think that what the other speakers and panelists before me were talking about morals, sincerity, honesty, and this is what the youth is expecting. And it is true. We are fed up. We are tired of tokenism. We know what tokenism is. We know what it means as a young person to be used to let's say conduct greenwashing, because now a lot of the young people are used in cohorts to have campaigns, public campaigns for politicians or for people who want to gain fame. And in the end, our efforts are no longer needed. And this is what I expect from the Youth for Climate event in Milano. I expect us to be heard, to actually have our efforts significant, like we want to do something that can result into something that is relevant for the pre-COP meeting in Milano later, and also for COP26. But at the same time, we shouldn't stop all of our efforts just for this big worldwide event. We should continue our fight against climate change and to pursue continuously these efforts that the young people are bringing together. To be honest, what I've been seeing as a youth delegate, because we have our communication channels with the other delegates, it's very hard to bring them together, especially now with COVID situation. It is so hard to arrange the visas, the transport requirements, the accommodations for the young delegates that are coming from all over the world. There's a huge discrepancy, a huge inequality happening right now in the youth activism. So I expect on one side to not have this complete representation of the world at the youth climate event. And I'm also expecting us, the people who can be present in Milano, to step up and represent these people that cannot be heard because of the COVID restrictions. So I could go on and on and on, but I will just stop here.
Thank you very much, Maria. Indeed, this is a very important point you make. Of course, advocacy is not just about bringing up very important themes and topics, but it is also making sure that the process of identifying priorities are respecting a number of criteria and principles that have been in the past neglected significantly, especially giving space and the opportunity to make their voices heard to people belonging to vulnerable and marginalized groups. So indeed, this is a very important point. Thank you very much. We will come back to you later with another question more tailored on your personal research history. But I would like now to move to our second panelist, Abraham Bugre. Abraham is a climate change and sustainability professional committed to the Sustainable Development Goals. He is currently the Partnership and Engagement Officer at the Green Africa Youth Organization, as well as the lead for the 2021 Local Conference of Youth on Climate Change in Ghana. So welcome, Abraham. And perhaps I noted that you wrote once that the hard work of African countries to develop will be undone if climate change is not addressed. So perhaps I think it could be very interesting if you could further elaborate on this concept of yours, and also if you could tell us whether you think that the current instruments that the international community has adopted, such as the Paris Agreement that was mentioned earlier, do you think are they adequate or fit for purpose of avoiding that the consequences of climate change indeed undermine the development in the most vulnerable countries? So please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Federico. You actually talking about that quote actually reminded me of the events that led to me thinking that way. I had just finished my undergrad. I had never heard the word climate change before, and I was actually doing my national service with the Regional Institute for Population Studies, and they had a climate change department, and I started working with them, and that is how I first heard of the word climate change. Fortunately for me, they were working on a coastal, project. And I remember when we went to the community, we were talking to one of the community leaders, and we were standing in front of the beach, and he was pointing to the sea, expecting us to actually tell the distance. And he was saying, "Can you see down there? That is where my house used to be when I was a kid." Now it had been consumed by the sea. And this told me immediately how serious the impacts of climate change are. I started reading the IPCC report. I think the IPCC report, the 5th report, And I saw all these things, all the dangers that climate change, pose to especially the vulnerable group. And even currently, the new IPCC report is telling us that the climate systems is changing at an unprecedented rate. I'm working on a project in the northern part of Ghana with a professor from University of Regina on the changing roles of women in smallholder farming communities. And I can tell you, I can share one story. There was a woman that I went to her farm. She told me that the only parcel of land that she has to farm on is the land that was given to her by her husband. It's actually dry in the dry season, but in the rainy season, it is a waterway. And it slopes down. So she came up with this ingenious method where she plants rice just before the land slopes. And then down below, she has, her cowpeas and then the maize and then the millet. But she told me that for 3 consecutive seasons, the rains and the water levels has been disturbing, and then the rice cannot even hold the water, which she used to do. When I went to the farm, the rains had come and the water had carried away all the rice, all her crops. And I was holding my camera and I went down and I took a picture. And when I got up and I turned and I looked at her, I was going to ask a follow-up question. I saw tears running down her eyes. And this tells you how, the impacts of climate change is real on local people, on people, the vulnerable and the marginalized in our communities. And so for me, it is interesting that we are seeing all these partnerships happening and all these